Hello, I'm Ganel-Lyn. This is Thoughts on the Book of Mormon. You're getting me a little sunburned. It's at the time of this taping. It's the middle of the summer. And I have just woken up and I'm wearing a t-shirt today that I'm going to kind of tie in today. We're talking about Enos and Jarom. I love the book of Enos. I just love this story. And I wanted to share hopefully some new perspectives on it. Enos, as he goes out to wrestle before God, he's just doing his regular job. He's hunting. And I think that's important to note that as we're praying to God, it doesn't have to always be in a formal setting. It was what he was going to be doing. And I don't know if he planned to have like a first vision experience where he was going to the sacred grove to get some answers, or if he was out hunting and had a lot on his mind and decided this is a good time to talk to God. And he was pondering, I think, a lot on what his father had taught him. And from those words, they sunk deep into his heart, and he hungered and prayed and raised his voice to heaven. And I think about often when we talk about Enos that he prayed all the day long. And I wonder, did he just sit, meditate, ponder, read his scriptures, journal, or did he continue to hunt? And as a hunter, he was praying all the time. And took breaks. I don't know. But I think what touched me the most is this t-shirt is from my 30th class reunion. 30 years ago, I graduated from Marysville High School in Northern California. And recently I went to the reunion and we got these t-shirts saying MHS has never been the same because of the class of 89. And I'm thinking about how Enos was pondering on the words his father had taught him. So I'm wondering, age-wise, is it kind of the age I was when I graduated high school and I went off to college and I needed to make some decisions? Was I going to do what I had been taught? Or now that I was out on my own, was I going to take a different path? And I kind of feel like Enos was in that place a little bit. And he remembered what his father had taught him. And I think as parents of teenagers, we wonder, is it sinking into their heart? And I know for many of you that are watching, maybe you have children that have taken a different path than what you hoped for them. And that can be discouraging. But I love also Enos's example of how he prays. And I say this because I think it's important to note that no matter where your kids are at on the path, what you gave them is in their hearts. And as they interact with you, if they continue to feel your love for them, then the Spirit will be there and they will be more likely to return. So in the meantime, you preserve the relationship and you love them. So back to Enos. I think he's having this kind of like, he's at a crossroads and he remembers and he prays all day long and his sins are forgiven. And I think about the kind of faith that made Enos whole, that he prayed that way, that it made him whole. Am I praying in that same way of faith? He prayed for his people. He prayed for the people he loved. He prayed that the opposition for what they are going up against, that they would remain strong. But he also prayed for his enemies, the Lamanites. And he wanted those records preserved. He knew they were the key. And I think as we take for granted sometimes reading these scriptures, this Book of Mormon that we have, there were so many prophets that prayed for the preservation just of the record because they knew. It wasn't like today where, everyone had all the records on their phone. They knew that the key to the civilization, to the hope, to the future, to the faith, to their people was their faith, and it was grounded in Scripture. So I think it's important to note that Scripture study grounds our families and our people. Enos had the faith that whatever he asked for in faith, he would receive. That kind of faith I'm always working on that kind of faith. He said his soul did rest according to the covenant which he had made in verse 17. And I have loved a friend of mine, Andrea, if you're watching this, does a really cool thing with her scripture study. She rewrites her scriptures to include her name, and maybe you've tried that. So I did this exact same process here where I rewrote, and I, Ganel-Lyn, knew it would be according to the covenant which God had made with me, wherefore my soul did rest. We can rest in our covenants. And I love putting my name in this scripture so it's personal. Enos took what he had experienced and testified to the Nephites the rest of his life. They were busy trying to minister to the Lamanites, and the Lamanites weren't softened and changed. And they were stiff-necked people and hard to understand. And he was boldly preaching to them and talking to them of wars and the ways to make them wake up and change their hearts. He saw the wars between the Nephites and Lamanites, and he preached and worked to try to serve. He was like, I think, up to 179 years old. And I rewrote another verse. I, Ganel-Lyn, have declared it in all my days and have rejoiced in it above that of the world. Ganel-Lyn will soon go to the place of rest, which is with my Redeemer, for I know that in him I will rest. And I, Ganel-Lyn, rejoice in the day when my mortal shall put on immortality and shall stand before him. Then shall I, Ganel-Lyn, see his face with pleasure, and he will say unto me, Come unto me, you blessed, there is a place prepared for you in the mansions of my Father. I hope that you will maybe practice with your family. This is a great family home evening activity to rewrite these verses in a way that remind us that our rest is with God, that he is preparing a mansion for us, that we can rejoice in that which is above the world. And so easily are we distracted. I love the example of Enos, where he left and he went out where he was hunting, and he was able to pray and have this very mighty experience where his sins were forgiven, and he was praying for those he loved and those he struggled to love. And then he spent the rest of his life taking this change of heart experience, this conversion experience, and preaching, trying to prepare and save his people. As we go into Jarom, the book of Jarom, this is Enos' son. He had a similar testimony of his forefathers, and he was aware of the hardened state of his people. So all that work that Enos had done, the Nephites are starting to also become hardened. Jarom tells us that other faithful people are in the community, not just him. He talks about these living prophets, and they were living the law of Moses, and they were being strict. So it was a very step-by-step kind of program, but they were always being prepared, as you recall, for the new covenant, which was Christ. The Lamanites were wicked. They were fighters, and the Nephites had to get their army prepared, and they were led by righteous men who were preparing them physically and spiritually. And I think as we read the Book of Mormon and we discuss the scriptures with our families, are we preparing our families physically and spiritually, mentally and emotionally for the wars that we're required to fight? Sometimes you don't know. You're not prepared until something hits you, and then you're like, oh my gosh, we need to work on that. And I think when you're reading your scriptures, you can pray for the Spirit to say, where is our family weak? Where do we need preparation? That's what I love about likening the war chapters, because sometimes we can just be like, oh my gosh, if I read another war story. God has been merciful, and he is continuing to be merciful by not wiping these people off the land. And their prophets and teachers and priests are diligent in teaching them and trying to, it says in this chapter, prick the hearts of the people to change. Have you ever been a teacher, a parent, a grandparent, or a speaker? I do a lot of this work where you're just wanting hearts to be pricked, because you know that that's where change happens, is when someone's heart is engaged, and just not their head as they're hearing you speak, or they're thinking, oh, that's a really great scripture story, or that's a great insight. But you want their hearts to be touched. When their hearts and minds are connected, then change happens. These are the small plates, and the small plates are eventually passed to the kings, but they're not the historical temporal record. that is on the large plates. So once again, I've said this on previous videos. I hope you have a small plates. I have a small plates here where I record impressions from scripture study. That's not my daily journal and my history. I hope this helps you in some way, and I hope you will feel that love.